How would you deal with accidentally killing someone? According to Stat Canada, from 2000 to 2004, there were 44,192 accidental deaths in Canada. 32% of them were the result of motor vehicle accidents. In the 15 to 24 age group, motor vehicle accidents accounted for 70% of all accidental deaths. At 18 years old, Darren Strauss ended the life of Celine Zilk with his car. He was not at fault. Math proves it. As Strauss wrote, "You're doing 40, and the girl with the bicycle cuts 10 feet in front of you. Impact will arrive in something like 700 milliseconds. Human perception time, not only to see a hazard, but to understand one as such, is generally accepted to saw off some 220 milliseconds. Next, the mostly neural job of getting foot to brake demanded another 500 milliseconds. It seemed I was exculpated by 20 milliseconds." However, guilt still follows him for years to come. It's a nasty balance of guilt and blame. The second he starts moving on from his guilt, he gets sued by Celine's parents. He's right back at square one. He starts living again, but a girlfriend blames him for not thinking about Celine enough. And then, boom! The guilt and questioning come hurtling back towards him, making him stuck halfway across the bridge of moving along. The cycle goes on until he tells his future wife and discovers the key, being he is not alone. To save a life, Jake's old best friend, Roger, walks into school with a gun and kills himself. When they were younger, Roger saves Jake's life by pushing him out of the way of a car, taking the hit himself, and coming out in the process with a limp. However, once they hit high school, Jake seems to forget all about this, leaving Roger in the dust. That is, until Roger walks into the school with a gun. Jake finds his profile on a suicide forum, where he finds this.
I feel so alone. Like I'm the only person in the world that feels this way, and it doesn't even matter. It's not important. It's not important. Maybe because I'm not important. I'm screaming out, doing everything in my power to be heard. And even silence is not in my screams. I just can't think of being heard, but to tear down my world, to break apart my life. Die. God, I just want somebody to listen and to not be angry that I'm not content, because if I'm not, I'm not happy. I feel like I'm stuck in a world where no one wants me. In a world where I'm so completely different, I can never fit in or be understood. I can scream as loud as I want to, but the screams will always fade because no one really knows how to listen. Maybe this will show.
And thus begins his guilt trip, because he thinks he is responsible for Roger's suicide. In Jake's case, though, it isn't the realization that he isn't alone that saves him from his guilt. It's his newfound faith and his new pastor. Jake makes up for the death of Roger he causes by saving the life of another boy, Johnny, simply by spending time with him. The one thing that links these two texts together, other than the obvious death and car accidents, is the protagonist's struggle with complicated grief syndrome. Complicated grief syndrome, or CG, falls into many different categories. It could be absent grief, where grief isn't present in a case where it should be. Abbreviated grief, where the grieving period should be longer than it is. Delayed grief, where grieving is delayed, possibly due to responsibilities such as funeral planning, but may come years later from another trigger. inhibited grief, where not all grieving behaviors are present, conflicted grief, where one grieving behavior is greatly exaggerated, which may cause extreme anger or guilt, chronic grief, where grief lasts longer than it should, and unanticipated grief, which comes from a sudden, unexpected death. 5 years ago, in Langley, BC, a case very similar to that of Darren Strauss occurred. An elderly woman pressed the gas pedal instead of the brake pedal while parking, pinning 6-year-old Joshua Bates to a pillar. Josh was supposed to be entering 2nd grade at my school the next week. Though we were all hit hard, none was hit harder than that lady. She was an active member of the community, and her guilt overrode everything. Nobody really blamed her, though. She had, and still has, a classic case of complicated grief syndrome. In the end, a bench was erected in memory of Josh, and still stands there today, guarding our new playground. The Columbine High School massacre was one of the worst events in a long while, and the effects of it shook the nation for years to come. What many don't know is the guilt Dylan and Eric, the shooters, went through before they even started the massacre. Eric was quoted numerous times in the basement videos expressing guilt for what he would put his parents through, stating, "It fucking sucks to do this to them. They're going to be put through hell," and quoting Shakespeare saying, "Good wombs have borne bad sons." Again, more people with complicated grief syndrome. Rick Osborne spent his youth in Niagara Falls. All was going well until he was 14. At 14, Rick was introduced to drugs, along with which came violence, crime, and gangs. By 20 years old, he was already on Canada's most wanted list. Even after his first release from jail, he was back by the end of 6 weeks. He thought about ending it all, but in the end, he turned his life around. When he met his wife, Mrs. Osborne, an ex-English teacher at NHS, he started working with troubled youth, teaching them trades to prevent them from following in his footsteps. Eventually, they moved up north to Ujubugamu, a small native reserve, where they both teach skills to help troubled teens lead a better life. This is one of the cases where the guilt from his old life led to better lives for others. Up until now, all you have heard is objective accounts of different public events and figures. This, however, is where we delve into more personal account. Last summer, I went to Haiti. While there, I met an amazing man named Mike. Mike was originally from the States. Growing up, Mike was homeless, and his mother was almost never around. Inevitably, Mike got into drugs. All that was important to him was getting high. He would do anything to get his fix. He tried to get clean, but always gave up. Typical druggie story. One day, he woke up after overdosing, and he was badly beaten up. He knew he had to change, or he was going to die. So he drove out of town towards a rehab center. His car broke down. Mike continued on foot, walking something like 30 miles. When he finally got clean, he felt guilty for wasting his life. So he joined a group that brought him to Haiti. Mike fell in love with Haiti, so much so that he moved there and began working with another family, the Mangines, to help orphans there. They, along with his wife, run an organization called Joy and Hope, and they work with adorable kids like this. Mike changed my life. Mike forced me to think about my own troubled past. I didn't have the drugs, but I still have a whole bunch of things that I've always regretted. I had this intense self-guilt, and as a way of dealing with it, I would self-injure. If I hadn't met Mike, I would probably still be in that position of overwhelming guilt today. Of course, Mike wasn't the only one who changed me, but he did have a profound impact. Mike taught me that no matter your past, you can always move forward to a brighter future. Guilt and blame affects us all in many different ways. Whether it affects you for the good or bad, it always has some impact. Half a life, and to save a life, changed my perspectives on guilt. But the one question still remains. How would they affect you?